This is the story of Vuong Quyen, also known as Kenny Ong, a young woman whose life seemed to hold everything: success, love, and promise, until it was cut short in a single night. Her case shook Malaysia. It forced a nation to reconsider public safety, and it left behind a legacy of grief, unanswered questions, and painful lessons. Born in 1974, Vuong Quyen was the daughter of a respected school principal and a devoted teacher. Her upbringing reflected discipline, respect, and an unwavering belief in education. She was gifted, bright in her studies, but also physically strong. She trained hard in Taekwondo, ultimately earning her black belt. This was not just sport. It was discipline, resilience, and a symbol of her determination. To her teachers and friends, she represented the ideal blend of intellect and strength. Her academic excellence opened doors to the United States. She was accepted into the University of California, where she pursued information technology. After graduation, she began her career as an IT specialist. Colleagues remembered her as sharp, reliable, and highly professional, the kind of employee every team valued. In 2001, her personal life also flourished. She married Vuong Tien, and together they built a stable and promising life in America. But in early 2003, everything changed. Her father was diagnosed with cancer. Without hesitation, Vuong Quyen returned home to Malaysia on June 1, 2003. She wanted to be by his side, supporting him, supporting her family. The surgery was a success. Her father survived, and recovery began. Relief filled the household. Her plan was simple: spend a little more time at home, then return to her husband and career in the United States. But fate had a different plan.
On the night of June 13, 2003, family and friends organized a farewell dinner for her at the Bangsar shopping complex in Kuala Lumpur. It was meant to be a celebration, a joyful gathering before she left for America once again. Around 10 p.m., after the dinner ended, she walked with her mother and younger sister down to the underground parking lot. Then she realized she had forgotten the parking ticket. Telling her family to wait, she turned back, alone. She stepped into the elevator. 20 minutes passed. She never came back. Her phone suddenly unreachable. What began as a small, ordinary mistake became the start of a nightmare.
When 20 minutes passed and Kenny Ong still hadn't returned, her family grew uneasy. Her mother and sister tried calling her mobile phone. No answer. At first, they thought it was a simple delay. But as more minutes slipped by, unease turned into fear. They retraced her steps, checking the corridors, the elevator, the parking lot. There was no sign of her. By now, panic had set in. Something was wrong. Her family reported the situation to security, and very soon, the search began. The first breakthrough came from the shopping complex's security cameras. The footage was chilling. On screen, Kenny Ong could be seen returning to the parking lot elevator. Then, an unknown man appeared. He confronted her. He struggled with her. He forced her back toward her own car. Moments later, he drove away with her inside. It was now clear. This was now just a disappearance. This was an abduction. Her family immediately contacted police. A nationwide search was launched. To encourage leads, the Ong family offered a reward of 10,000 ringgit for any information. 3 days later, on June 16th, investigators made a grim discovery. They located Kenny Ong's car, abandoned at a construction site. Inside, they found bloodstains, and further forensic testing revealed the presence of male DNA. The evidence told investigators a disturbing story. She had been assaulted inside her own vehicle. It was the first confirmation that this case was far darker than anyone hoped. In the witness accounts, witnesses began to come forward. A taxi driver reported finding a handbag and a mobile phone discarded by the roadside. They belonged to Kenny Ong. Another witness, a woman named Amina, described a haunting encounter. She had seen a car pass by, inside a woman desperately waving, signaling for help. A man was at the wheel. Alarmed, Amina tried to intervene, but when the driver realized she was watching, he sped off. That woman was most certainly Kenny Ong. But perhaps the most troubling witness account came from a police patrol officer. On the night of the abduction, he had stopped a suspicious car. Inside, he saw a distressed woman. She pleaded silently for help. The officer took the driver's identification card and Kenny Ong's identity card as well. Yet, despite the warning signs, he allowed the car to continue on its way. Later, this decision would be questioned again and again. Why wasn't action taken then? Could her life have been saved? On June 17, 2003, the search ended in tragedy. Construction workers discovered a charred body in a drainage canal. The remains were badly burned, but investigators also noted stab wounds to the abdomen. The body bore the signs of assault. DNA testing confirmed the worst. It was Kenny Ong. A young life, brutally ended. Investigated, with her body identified, the investigation shifted focus. Who was the man seen on camera? Who had driven her car? And what could be uncovered from the DNA evidence left behind? The answers would lead police to a man named Mohammed Azad Nazib, a man with a family, a business, and a hidden darkness that shocked the nation. With the discovery of Kenny Ong's body, investigators turned their full attention to finding her killer. The CCTV footage, the blood evidence inside her car, and the accounts of witnesses all pointed to a single conclusion. They were looking for a man who had carefully stalked his victim. But soon, thanks to one crucial lead, the search began to narrow. Remember the patrol officer who had stopped a suspicious car on the night Kenny was taken? He had written down the driver's identification details. That information, now revisited, became the breakthrough police desperately needed. The driver's name was Mohammed Azad Nazib. Nazib was 27 years old. On the surface, he appeared to be a respectable man. He was the director of a cleaning company that serviced aircraft. He had a wife, pregnant at the time, and a young child. But behind this image of stability, investigators soon uncovered a darker side. On June 20, 2003, just 3 days after Kenny's body was discovered, police moved in. They arrested Mohammed Azad Nazib. Confronted with the evidence, he confessed. His account of the crime was chilling. He admitted that he had been at the Bangsar shopping complex that night. He noticed Kenny Ong in the parking lot and became fixated. He said that desire overcame him. He waited, watching, and when she returned alone to the elevator, he made his move. He forced her into her own car. He drove away with her. He assaulted her twice. When she resisted, when she tried to fight back, he stabbed her in the abdomen. Believing she was dying, he dumped her body into a drainage canal. But he wasn't finished. Afraid the evidence might expose him, he returned later. He set her body on fire, hoping to erase the traces of what he had done. This was the confession of Mohammed Azad Nazib, a husband, a father-to-be, a businessman, and now a self-admitted killer. But while his initial confession seemed to close the case, the legal battle that followed would prove anything but simple. Because soon after, Nazib would change his story. He would claim he had been coerced into confessing, and in court, his defense would try to paint an entirely different picture of what happened between him and Kenny Ong. The trial would become one of Malaysia's most closely watched courtroom dramas of the decade. With Mohammed Azad Nazib in custody, prosecutors prepared their case. They had his initial confession. They had forensic evidence from Kenny Ong's car, and they had multiple witness accounts. It seemed overwhelming. But once inside the courtroom, the case became far more complicated. Nazib retracted his confession. He claimed he had been pressured by police. According to him, the statement he gave was not voluntary. His defense team went further. They argued that the evidence against him was circumstantial. They pointed out that there were no direct eyewitnesses to the killing itself. And then, they made a claim that stunned many. They suggested that Kenny Ong had not been a victim of abduction at all, that she had gone with Nazib willingly. The defense floated the idea of a consensual relationship. They argued that the encounters in the car may not have been forced. Some even suggested the two had an ongoing connection. For the Ong family, for the public, and for investigators who had pieced together the timeline, this was deeply offensive. Psychologists were called to testify. They dismissed the defense's theory, explaining that all evidence, from her character, her background, her movements that night, showed she had no reason, no interest, and no history that would support such a claim. The prosecution, meanwhile, built its case around the hard facts, the CCTV footage that captured Kenny Ong being forced into her car, the blood and DNA evidence found inside that same vehicle, the witness testimony of Amina, who saw a woman in distress waving for help, and the chilling account of the police officer who admitted to stopping the car and seeing Kenny Ong's silent plea. Piece by piece, the prosecution dismantled the defense's story. Lower, somber, delivering the judgment. On February 23, 2005, the court delivered its verdict. Mohammed Azad Nazib was sentenced to death by hanging for the murder of Kenny Ong. He also received 20 years in prison for rape and 10 strokes of the cane. Nazib appealed. He took his case first to the Court of Appeal in 2007 and later to the federal court in 2009. But each time the judgment stood. The evidence was too strong, the facts too clear. His appeals were dismissed. For more than a decade he lived on death row. And then, in September 2016, news broke once more. On September 23, 2016, Mohammed Azad Nazib was found dead in his prison cell. He had hanged himself. The case that had begun with a sudden abduction in a parking garage ended with the killer taking his own life behind bars. But while the courtroom battle had ended, the effects of Kenny Ong's murder continued to ripple outward, through her family, through Malaysian society, and through the very way the public thought about safety in their daily lives. The murder of Kenny Ong did not just end with a conviction. It became a story that forced an entire country to confront questions about safety, trust, and justice.
Kenny Ong was not only a respected executive, she came from a prominent family. Her brother was the well-known fashion designer Jimmy Ong, often referred to in English circles as Roy Ong. Her loss was felt deeply in Malaysia's creative community. Her murder was seen not just as a personal tragedy, but as an assault on a society that prided itself on relative safety in everyday life. In the weeks after her death, public outrage boiled over. People asked, how could something like this happen in a well-lit central parking garage in Kuala Lumpur? The detail that a police officer had seen Kenny Ong alive, had seen her signaling for help, and yet failed to act, sparked particular anger. Citizens demanded accountability. The story became a rallying cry against negligence, against apathy, and against a system that had allowed such a lapse.
The Malaysian police came under scrutiny. Questions were raised about training, responsiveness, and the chain of command that had failed Kenny Ong. Government officials were forced to address public concerns. In the years following the trial, discussions about women's safety, better surveillance systems, and stricter enforcement of parking security policies grew louder. The legal impact was also significant. The case became a reference point in Malaysia for how courts should handle claims of coerced confessions and defense strategies that relied on victim blaming. Lawyers, academics, and journalists cited the Ong trial as an example of why the justice system must remain anchored in evidence and resist narratives that undermine victims. For Kenny Ong's family, the grief never fully lifted, but they chose to honor her memory by continuing their work, by speaking about her life, and by making sure her story was not forgotten. Jimmy Ong, in interviews, often described his sister as a person of kindness, intelligence, and drive, a woman whose future was stolen in a single night. The Ong case also became a touchstone in discussions about violence against women. It highlighted the danger of everyday settings that many assumed were safe: parking garages, public spaces, late-night commutes. Advocacy groups began using her story as part of campaigns for better awareness and stronger protections. For many Malaysians, the name Kenny Ong became synonymous with a reminder that society has a collective responsibility to look out for one another. And yet, the tragedy also revealed something else: that a single moment of hesitation, like the police officer who failed to intervene, can alter the course of a life forever. It became not just a case study in crime, but a lesson in civic duty. Nearly 2 decades later, the case remains one of Malaysia's most infamous true crime stories. It is remembered not only for its brutality, but also for the uncomfortable truths it revealed about law enforcement, about public awareness, and about the silent signals of those in danger. Every true crime story leaves behind more than headlines and legal records. It leaves echoes, echoes that continue in the families, in the justice system, and in the way a society remembers its victims. Kenny Ong's story is no exception. She was more than the woman in the news. She was a daughter, a sister, a professional, and a friend. Her colleagues remembered her determination and her professionalism. Her family remembered her laughter, her kindness, and the life she should have lived. When her brother, Roy Ong, spoke publicly, his words carried both grief and resilience. He reminded people that Kenny was not just a victim. She was a person who had dreams, ambitions, and a future. The investigation revealed systemic flaws. The trial exposed the tactics sometimes used in defense, tactics that shift blame away from perpetrators. The appeals and final outcome confirmed the weight of the evidence, and the aftermath forced institutions and ordinary citizens alike to ask, what does justice really mean? And what responsibility do we each bear when confronted with someone in distress? For law enforcement, the lesson was clear. Hesitation can kill. The officer who saw Kenny Ong that night will forever be remembered as the man who could have saved her, but didn't. For the public, the case became a reminder. Safety is not something we can assume. Awareness, vigilance, and courage matter, even in moments that may seem uncertain or inconvenient. Kenny Ong's murder was brutal, but her legacy is not only one of tragedy. It is also one of awakening, a story that pushed a society to look at its blind spots, to question its systems, and to demand better protections for women and for all vulnerable citizens. Even today, nearly 20 years later, her name is invoked when Malaysians discuss safety reforms, justice, and the human cost of indifference. As we close this investigation, one truth remains. Behind every case file, every headline, every verdict, there is a human life that mattered. Kenny Ong's life mattered, and remembering her story is one way of ensuring that her death was not in vain.